are live, everyone. Welcome to the family meeting. We're doing the Tuesday edition. We've had random days lately.
Yes, mainly because of travel.
Who's ready to talk about, I don't know, what is this? What is this? We're going to just get into the messaging, the propaganda, and the cultural programming of where we are in propagating and pushing messaging of political violence on the left. That's where we are.
Yes. They be great.
We got to talk about it.
TBC.
Let's do it.
That'd be great.
All right. So we're going to start off with a 2-minute montage because our contention is that the left has a violence problem. We're not going to do the whole both sidesism thing. We're going to talk about the left has a violence problem. And we're going to start off with a 2-minute montage to help illustrate this point and kind of set the tone for the conversation that the left is constantly pushing one particular narrative. Here we go.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face, and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
There it is. What say you, Kevin?
I would say those aren't even the worst clips. You know, you had Hassan Piker and Destiny stuff in there, like the influencers. It's way worse than that. It is extremely violent language. But yeah, this is what they do, and they radicalize their base, and then when their base acts out in violence, they try to say, "Oh well, you know, we condemn all political violence." Like, no, you don't. No, you don't. This is what the left does, and this is just the ideology and the tactic, and it's what you saw in Minneapolis. It's what you saw in LA with all the rioting down there in terms of immigration. Their whole point is to get their people radicalized and in the streets. That's just leftist ideology. It's their protest, their activism. And then on top of that, when you look at the Marxist elements of the left, the oppressor-oppressed framework, the oppressed can't do anything wrong. It's a moral relativism, right? And so if a person who is oppressed or in the oppressed category does something to someone in the oppressed category, then it's justified, right? It is an act of resistance. It's liberation. It's October 7th in Israel. That's why they cheered that. That's why Mamdani can't condemn Hamas for October 7th, because he believes it was a moral and righteous act. Because morality isn't just even across the board. It is based on social location, right? And so when the CEO, a healthcare CEO, gets murdered in the street, that's okay. That's good. That was an act of liberation and resistance, because as Hassan Piker said, that CEO was committing social murder, right? And so things like social murder, and you justify actual violence. You know, Charlie Kirk's murderer, some hate you negotiate with, right? They are radicalized to believe words of violence and disagreement is hate, right? And these are fascists and Nazis and to democracy and all these things they say over and over again. And it has an effect. And here's the difference. And this is why it's on the left and not just the right, because they'll say, well, President Trump said this, or some right-wing person, Rush Limbaugh, one time said this. Here's the difference. When Rush Limbaugh said something, right, it wasn't repeated over and over again on every outlet giving the same thought process, right? And it wasn't coming from politicians repeating the same verbiage and thought process. And then it wasn't backed up by an organization like the SPLC that then says, oh no, this person is an extremist. This person is a hate group, you know? And so it gets codified as a narrative of truth on the left, right? And when you codify those narratives in people's psyche, you encourage them to act on it, because the righteous thing would be to kill Hitler. If Hitler's in power, the righteous thing to do is to be Bonhoeffer and kill Hitler. And so if someone has convinced you that the president is Hitler, won't you take the shot? Shouldn't you try? And that's the logic and reason they've given these people. And then when these people act on it, they want to be like, oh, thoughts and prayers. Oh, we condemn all political violence. No, you don't. No, you don't. And we need to stop playing this game and actually call these people out and hold them accountable to what they're creating. And they don't stop. They keep on. They're still putting out the rhetoric, even now, even today. So that's my thoughts.
Monique, what are your thoughts?
Regular people. I representing the regular people, I think the regular folk wish we could talk like that. Like, you can have these hands if you want them. Like, step on if you want it. But, you know, I do see what Kevin's saying, and it's I think I would call it like just the new righteousness. Like, what does it mean to be righteous? And we've said this before. We talked about it a bit on a live stream, like looking at kindness with the whole David French thing. But it's really like, what does it mean to be righteous? What does it mean to, you know, do good works and to do something that is right for the people? Kevin said it, you know, it's for the liberation of those who are oppressed. Mamdani's dad, and I forget his name, but he has
a quote. He had a wild quote
in a book that was from the early 2000s, and I have it on my phone, so I don't have his name or the book, but it says, suicide bombing needs to be understood as a feature of modern political violence rather than stigmatized as a mark of barbarism. We need to recognize the suicide bomber first and foremost as a category of soldier. And so, you know, like, if that's not clear, then I don't know what is. But, you know, as a category of soldier, when we think about soldiers, what do you think? You think about, I guess here in the West or here in the States, I'll say me, when I think about a soldier, I think of someone who is valiant, someone who is going to go to war and defend our country. They're standing on principles. They understand like what it means to defend something or to have something worth defending. And those oftentimes can be seen as righteous acts. When I think about the category of a soldier for the suicide bomber, I think of evil and hate and just wickedness. But what's being done is like this switch, this bait and switch, or this like shell game, I think is a word Crystal would use, to kind of switch around what does it mean to be righteous. Well, now acts of righteousness really are the suicide bomber. They're the valiant. They're the ones who are really seen as the ones we should be soon, I would say, applauding or recognizing as those who are doing good work.
Yeah. And think about the analogy. So a soldier is typically part of an army. They're fighting another army or enemy, right? A suicide bomber is walking into a grocery store. They're going into a market. They're and then blowing themselves up and trying to kill as many people as they can. That is not a soldier. That is not the same. And that's why you see it as evil, because it is. They're going out to innocent people for the purpose of just killing as many people as they can to cause terror. That's it. And so for him to say this, it's just completely asinine. And then we made his son the mayor of New York. So there we go.
What I also think is asinine is that this is an old conversation. We're in 2026. I want to say he wrote his book in between 2002 and 2004. These ideas have been here for a very long time. 2020, 2002 or 04 isn't that long ago, but these ideas have been around for a very long time. And for many, we're just now waking up and being like, oh, like this is really what they're talking about. It is really a death to our enemies mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think what all of this highlights to me is that Trump has broken people's minds. Like there is a very, I think, real and sad situation of this narrative of Hitler and Nazi and fascist. And yet the truth is, and Kevin, we've talked about this before, and I think this is a good summary from an Anon on X, is that Trump's policies are not historically conservative. Like you and I did a whole show about this. This person says Trump is not even right wing. He's fairly moderate in terms of his positions as a quote unquote Republican. But something about him has mentally broken these people. It is not even rational how they respond to him. And you and I did a whole show together. I don't think Monique was part of that, but we did a whole show together about what is a conservative and how Trump is not a traditional conservative. And his policies are essentially, in many regards, 1990s Clinton era policies. Yep. He's a 1990s Democrat.
Yep. And abortion safe, legal, and rare, tough on crime. Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is your theory about what has broken people about Trump, that they continually engage in this kind of rhetoric? And it comes from Hollywood stars, it comes from the mainstream media, all the way down to, people that we all know who truly in their hearts believe that we will never have another free election because Trump will be president forever.
This is just me putting on my tinfoil hat and how I see it as to why. Trump threatened the system, right? He really did. He's not from the politician system. Trump wasn't, appointed and brought up like Barack Obama, right? He wasn't a Clinton. He comes out of, entertainment and real estate. And here he comes, and they thought he had no shot at winning. And then he wins, right? And I would say the machine went full force to take him down, to spin this narrative about him, right? Trump was hanging out with all of these Democrats. He's hanging out with all these black people and rappers, and no one said he was racist. And then he runs for president as Republican, and then what's the narrative, right? is how racist he is, how horrible he is. He's a Nazi, he's a fascist. And they've just tried. I've never seen, whether it was Russiagate, whether it was the sexual assault claim from 40 years ago, whether it was, you know, the stuff in Georgia. I forgot the DA's name.
Fani Willis.
Yeah, Fannie Willis. Like all of that stuff. I've never seen an attack to try to bring down a person as much as I've seen them try to do to Trump, right? And it's all based on the narrative that the media is complicit. This is not the if you want to know how complete the media is in terms of their political bias and how they try to help one side and they try to tear down the other, just look at their reporting on Joe Biden's mental health. When everybody in the world could see it, they were completely silent. That tells you everything, right? And it was only when it was so bad they couldn't hide it no more and he was hurting them that they started writing about it and talking about it. And then after he lost the election, somebody comes out with a book. Like, y'all knew this the whole time, but they state nothing because they are Democrats. They're part of the DNC machine. And so they are part of the campaign trail against Trump. They create these narratives and they say them over and over again and they repeat it over and over again. And Joe Scarborough on MSNBC and Joy Reid and all of these people. And it becomes the narrative. This is all about narratives, right?
Well, and you see people like this, the outside, these were taken outside the White House press.
They believe the narrative.
And these are just, I'm assuming the best about them. They're well-meaning people.
Yes.
They've been filled with so much crazy propaganda. They're holding up signs that says death to tyrant, death to all of them. Like, these are very violent kinds of statements, and yet we are normalizing this.
And these people are serious. These people are serious. These people they will burst into tears. They're full of anxiety. They're full of fear. Look how several people moved to Canada after the election and the other places. Like, they literally believe the stuff that they're being told. Well, the question is, who told them? Where does the narrative come from? It's coming from Democrat politicians and the media. And then they're paid influencers, right, to spin a particular narrative over and over again. And these people ingest it. My family members haven't ingested it. They have Trump derangement syndrome. They can't even see a Trump post without freaking out. You know, it's psychological warfare is what it is. And it's effective. And they know that's what it is. And then they try to act shocked and surprised when some nutcase, or in this, not sometimes even a nutcase, it's a rational person who just believed what they've said, you know, tries to do something, right? And when Hassan Piker recently said, you know, somebody just needs to do it, and everybody knew what he was talking about, and they started chuckling, right? Or Tim Walz, remember when Trump was missing for over the weekend? It had been 2 or 3 days. He hadn't posted, and it was these rumors that he had died or he was sick or something. And Tim Walz was at a little rally, was like, "Hey, we keep waiting for some news," you know, and everybody's laughed. They're waiting for him to die. They want him to die. They want him to be dead, you know? And it's just completely irrational. And that's what they've sold people on. And so that's what it is. It is the power of the machine. And the machine is the ability to control narratives. And if you push a narrative hard enough, people will buy it. People will believe it. And that's what they've done since 2015, 2016. And yeah, it is. And even though none of it comes to fruition, the Hitler stuff never comes to fruition. They said we would never have another election when he got elected in 2016. And then 2020 happened, they won. And that was a free and fair election in 2020. And then in 2024, he wins. They claim that he stole it. But I thought denying election was un-American and fascist. But it's only when someone else does it. It is what is it called? Regressive tolerance or repressive tolerance, where you allow it for the left, but then you condemn it on the right. They do it every single day. There is no way that type of language would be allowed to come from conservatives or Republicans and the media not be in uproar and be condemning it. But when it comes from Democrats, when it comes from their paid social media influencers, they get to be on the New York Times podcast. right? They get invited to Yale. They don't get condemned. You know, they shut up and they stay silent.
Go ahead, Monique.
I was going to say, yes, I agree, but I also don't. I also think that it's not about Trump breaking people's minds. I think people's minds have been broken. I think the Frankfurt School and their investigations into culture and like how we fix these things or what needs to be done to free the oppressed or to liberate the oppressed. I feel like our minds have been broken. Think about I want to say it was Lenin who said, you know, give me your kids. I'm summarizing. Give me your kids for 4 years and I'm going to, you know, basically give you a communist. Like we have our culture, the minds of people in the West have been broken. And so Trump then comes on the scene and he isn't looking the way that they need people to look, the way leaders need to look to be able to continue down the path that they're on. And so how do we get rid of the bump in the middle of the street? How do we flatten that out? Well, we have to take it out. And that's it. The minds have been broken. And these are the minds, I will say, in the church and without, and not just on the left. This is why we get so many people who are conservative Christians, you know, conservative Christians who believe all the same things we believe about Jesus, but yet they're going to uphold a social justice narrative because we have been broken as a people in our brains have been broken. And so when you get someone like a Megan Basham, when you get someone like us or people who are like a Chad Jackson or people who are going to speak truth that go against the narrative, then like I had somebody on my page this week who, what do you call me? Like a low IQ Negro. Like you have to say, then you have to like call the names. You have to, you know, at the higher levels, take them out. You get a Charlie Kirk. He has to go because the message is against the narrative. It's healing or reversing the minds that have been broken, causing people to question and think. So our minds have been broken. Trump ain't broke nobody's mind. Trump is only revealing what is already there.
True. And I can concede that Trump has a very unorthodox style of speaking and doing geopolitics and negotiating. But if you read his book, Art of the Deal, it makes a little more sense as to what he's doing. He's makes some big grandiose claim and then he kind of whittles it down from there. And then you're kind of like, okay, we're going to war. No, we're in a ceasefire. Just kidding. Okay, end of the ceasefire. No, we're extending it. Like this is all just kind of part of what he does. But meanwhile, people are like, is he crazy? You know, what's happening? We need to take him out. I think that these statistics are important for us to keep in mind that, and this is from a YouGov, pretty recent YouGov poll. I think this is from 2025. If you look at, this is the question here is most Americans across the political spectrum say political violence is never justified. So what they mean by most is about 72% of Americans on average. But younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. So 25% of very liberal Americans, 25%, so it's 1 in 4, believe that, yes, violence can sometimes be justified. 6% prefer not to say. 14% are unsure. I mean, these numbers are not encouraging. And if we just go down to from very liberal to just liberal, it's still about, 1 in 5. I mean, this is not super encouraging. And to me, when I think about these numbers and I look at them, I'm like, well, given the high rates of public school indoctrination, I don't know, is there a connection between these things of, social agitation and people think that, I got to be on the right side of history and I got to denounce this and I got to stand against the machine and all the oppression and the whiteness and the Western civilization. And so it kind of leads here. I don't know. This is disturbing, but when you look at the ages, like 19% of 18 to 29-year-olds, that's about 1 in 5, believe that political violence is sometimes okay.
Yeah. And it goes along with what Monique said about us already being broken. I was thinking about this did precede Trump in terms of the brokenness. They go back to 2012 when BLM was created. And then you see in the media, we've shown this graphic before. It's this hockey stick of 2012, and it just shoots straight up in the air of words like racist, racism, white supremacy. All these words start being used in media over and over again. And it was just fervent ground. And then when Trump comes along, it just explodes, right? But people start to lose their mind in 2012 with Trayvon Martin. 2014 was Ferguson. By 2016, you've got Kaepernick kneeling, you got the Trump election. Like, this stuff was just building up. And, Trump was just kind of like the gasoline when the match was already lit kind of deal. But you're right. Because think about 2012, 2013, if that's when it really started. That generation, that young generation has grown up in this. This is pretty much all they've known since they were kids, right? And so this kind of just political hotbed, this sense of no justice, no peace, this sense of revolution and resistance. These kids, that's all they've known. And yeah, they get it in their schools. They get it on social media. You got to remember, social media blew up around that time too. Yeah, we've had a younger generation that's been indoctrinated with this stuff. And it's coming from their favorite influencers. And so, yeah, and I created an infographic today about cultural Marxism and controlling the means of production of culture. That's what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
They control the means of production of culture, produce generations in this culture that produces this result. Because this is how you build revolutionaries. This is how you build people that's going to get out in the streets and do the thing that you want them to do. They're the useful idiot generation. And the further and further we get away from, the further and further we get away from I'm gonna say it to trigger some people, the Judeo-Christian foundation.
You're gonna trigger some people.
I am. I got paid $7,000 to do that. The further away we get from that, the more we're gonna get this culture that is. Yeah, go ahead, Mo.
So y'all remember 2020, 2021, everything was about the hegemonic discourse, hegemony, and all that. And it just makes me think about the gaslighting of the left in saying, well, whiteness is just a cultural hegemony and they run the discourse, and the right is just a hegemony. And, we have this main narrative in our society. And because of the main narrative in our society, minorities are oppressed. But what you get today is so opposite of that. The main discourse, the main narrative in our society today is that it's okay to pop somebody if they go against the narrative, or it's okay to cancel somebody. These are righteous acts. Like, we have bought in and people were really concerned. Like, it's all about whiteness, and it's all about the problems created by whiteness and cisgender, hetero, patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. That was the main thing. But in reality, I feel like that is the Trojan horse. That's what they led in with, this bright, shiny horse, and down with the patriarchy, down with whiteness and all these things. But when you actually let that into your building, what do you get when the side of that horse comes down? Except for political violence, you should be, looking at the jihadists as a soldier, and we should pop those who aren't, on board with us politically, and all in all these other areas. I don't know. It just made me think of that.
Yeah.
So I want to play a clip here in just a minute from the Tim Pool podcast. Because the rejoinder to all of what we're saying is, well, no, why are you focusing on the left? The right also has a political violence problem. This is, what about the other side? What about the right and all of that? So I want to play that clip in just a moment and address that very common concern, especially on Christian social media. But before I do that, I want to briefly mention Kevin's upcoming webinar. It is free. It is for church leaders, pastors, to help you get a game plan going to address current and contemporary topics. You know, things can heat up pretty quickly. People in your congregation can be like, hey, you're not talking about George Floyd enough, or you're talking about George Floyd too much, or you're not mentioning Charlie Kirk, or you mentioned Charlie Kirk. Like, people can get upset as to how you deal with the news. So Kevin, just tell us really quickly what you're going to do. This is a free webinar we have coming up, and I want to make sure that people can share it with their pastors and help them get connected to the ministry.
Yeah. Well, you know, churches and pastors they're under a lot of pressure. And a lot of times they just don't say anything because they're just afraid to step in that hornet's nest. But one thing we do know is that the one thing I've learned over the years in ministry, if you aren't discipling your people through something, someone else is. And so how do we help pastors shepherd their people through these types of things? You never want to preach the news cycle. But at the same time, the people need direction. And if they're not getting it from their pastor, they're not getting it from the church, then they're going to get it from MSNBC or Fox News, right? And so we want to help pastors kind of think through these issues and kind of understand ways in which they can walk their congregation through this. And that's the reason this ministry exists, is to equip pastors in churches to do this work, so that everybody doesn't have to tune in to the family meeting to hear a perspective because their pastors are silent, you know. And so we just want to kind of help encourage them, and also from the standpoint of how many times have we gotten told, well, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're not loving your neighbor, right? If you don't get the COVID vaccine, you're not loving your neighbor. If you support, you know, if you don't support open borders, then you're not loving your neighbor. You're not loving the immigrant, right? And so people misuse these scriptures to guilt Christians into certain policies. And so, you know, we're going to just address all of those types of things. And hopefully they leave there with a clearer, better understanding of ways in which they can just kind of help their churches to walk through some of these issues.
Awesome. Well, check out in the description and the comments for a link to find out more information about Kevin's upcoming free webinar. Again, it is free, but an RSVP is required. Okay, Monique, you want to jump in here and do something in the comments, and then I want to play the clip.
Yeah, and Kevin, I think you might be a better person. I'm just going to share some thoughts. There's a question or a comment. Let me see if I can get on the screen. Says, I've often wondered what makes political violence acceptable. I was taught that the Revolutionary War was good, but if political violence is bad, then wouldn't that mean the creation of the U.S. was too? I had a brief conversation with someone yesterday along this line. And the very first question it makes me think of, or the question I would ask back is, what is the role of government? If the role of government is to protect the people, or to punish the wicked, to wield the sword, it would make me wonder where or how we collapse. One, I would ask, how are we defining political violence? I think it would also be good for us to definitely use a formal definition of that. But in the founding of the U.S. and the Revolutionary War, was there something about the protecting of our people that was a goal in that? And when I look at what's happening today by rogue actors and people who are wanting to like pop Trump and things like that, I don't see them as being these, good faith actors looking to really protect the people from harm, as would be said in something like Romans 13. I don't know. I just had some kind of off the cuff thoughts about like, this is how I would begin to thread it out in my mind. Like, well, what is the role of government? When do we see things like violence as being acceptable, because I think there can be an argument made that, hey, like we must protect people, we must protect our people, our citizens, and at times that's not always going to feel lovey-dovey, like, oh yeah, we're all just gonna, get along. Wielding the sword is something that actually I think we can give warrant for. I don't know, Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a little bit tricky, only because you're basically talking about a government versus the government. You're talking about the government of the colonies, these local colonies that's an ocean away from the country that supposedly they're supposed to submit to, and the king they're supposed to submit to. And you've got a conflict between governments, essentially. That's kind of your typical conflict and warfare to me. I wouldn't necessarily call that political violence in the way we're talking about political violence in this case of, I don't like my political opposition, therefore I'm going to call for assassination. I don't like the healthcare CEO policy, and so I'm going to kill the CEO. Like that. This is the and then doing it under like a oppressed framework type of deal. And so to me, the Revolutionary War is a very different kind of category that people have argued whether biblically it should have been done in terms of, because you had Christians fighting Christians. And so to me, that's more of the issue with the Revolutionary War from a biblical standpoint, more so than a political violence conversation. Because it is, like, Mona, you're talking about protecting your people. You're talking about the government of the colonies locally opposing the government of the king across the ocean, right? And yeah, and so it's just a little bit different, a little bit complicated than what we're referring to in this modern day case.
Thanks. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting question. It wasn't a question that I had considered before. I hope I didn't take us too far off topic, but
no, it was somebody. I was say somebody asked me that question in church one time. After church, they came up to me and asked me, and I was stumped because I had never thought about it. I was like, let me get back to you.
So a good thing to think about is just war theory, and we did a whole show about just war theory last year on all the things and differentiating like that I think if I'm remembering right, we kind of covered this topic of what's the difference between terrorism and the American Revolution. And so it's more I would refer people to that. Maybe one of my moderators can put a link to that in the chat. So okay, I want to play this clip now from Tim Pool about answering this whole question that's bound to come up of, well, no, both sides have political violence problems.
The time that the right is violent. I hear from people like Hassan Piker. They say the right are evil, they're terrorists, they're violent. And I'm just sitting here being like, who? But then you get the ADL on their hate watch map. Is that what it is? Their heat map. Sorry, hate watch was SPLC. What is it? Hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, and terror. I don't know, something like that. Heat, they call it. And what happens is you'll be talking to a liberal and they'll say, but the right had that one guy at the church and the right had that guy in the school. And you know my response is to all of that? That's not the right. Shut your mouths. Okay? The right is a bunch of conservatives milling about, don't even protest. You get some guy who is a white supremacist and he kills somebody and they say, see, the right is violent. And conservatives like retards go, but it's only one guy. Conservatives, stop being retarded. White supremacists aren't conservatives. That's the point. They have decided that racism is conservatism. And conservatives go, but that's only one. Shut up. My response is, there is no mainstream white supremacist conservative movement. Shut your mouths. They're lying. You go to a Trump rally, there's a bunch of gay dudes. The conspiracy theory or the scandal is that a bunch of Republicans are gay and hooking up with like white dudes, hooking up with black dudes and otherwise. And then you're going to be like, yes, but if a white supremacist commits an act of terror, that's the same thing as the Republican Party. Huh? You want to know about the thing about the Democrats? Yeah. Okay. Mainstream Democrats actually march alongside and defend Antifa. That's it. And Antifa commits acts of violence. That's what I'm mad about. Now, you want to talk about communists and all that? Okay. Hassan Piker, which is on the New York Times. So when he defends assassinations and they put him on the New York Times, I say, yeah, the left is violent. When you point to one random white supremacist guy who committed a murder, I go, but that's not the right at all. There's no conservative marching with those people. There's no mainstream right-wing platform putting white supremacists who engage in violence on these platforms. You can talk about Nick Fuentes and the opinions you don't like and all of that stuff. Again, the Republican Party rejects him, and they rag on him all the time.
You muted.
So that's kind of one response to that. Kevin, what thoughts do you have about the whole?
Yeah, he's right. Like, I had a discussion with someone today on Facebook about, and they were trying to say, well, the left is having this argument too. They're having this, and I'm like, no, they're not. And the links they posted weren't to people that I would call the left. Now, they were liberals. They were classical liberals, like the Unheard podcast. You got the Free Press. They're not leftist today. They're considered right. Leftist. Tim Pool would be liberal, but he's considered right wing today. Like the coalition of what we call the right today. And so when we're talking about the left, we're talking about leftist, right? And he's right. They aren't having these discussions of is assassination, should we allow assassination? Should we listen to or promote Hassan Piker? They're not having these debates. They're in full step. There's no disagreement there. Whereas on the right, there's a battle. Nick Fuentes is shunned by mainstream Republicans. Nick Fuentes hates MAGA. He's telling everybody to vote Democrat right now, right? That stuff gets rejected on the right within conservatism, right? The protesting and marching and uprising and revolution is nowhere in right-wing ideology. It's nowhere within conservatism. We just don't think that way. We don't operate that way. The left operates that way. There is no revolutionary mindset on the political right. There just isn't. And then we talk about the woke right, but then what is the woke right doing? They're aligning themselves with the left. The Nick Fuentes of the world are saying vote Democrat. And so he's right. And there anybody from fear can commit act of violence. No one is saying no one who's ever committed an act of violence.
Sure.
What we're saying is that the ideology of the right does not promote or align with that and condemns it every time and has nothing to do with it. But the left would cheer it on their side, i.e. Charlie Kirk, October 7th. What did they do? They went out and cheered in March. BLM put out an infographic celebrating the paratroopers in Israel that killed all the people at the music festival. That's the difference. It's in their ideology and they promote it. And so this whole both sidesism and whataboutism, and you can keep that. You can kick rocks because the only thing you do when you do the whole both sidesism, and I know some conservatives who do that because they always want to try to remain centrist. They always they don't want to seem tribal or they don't want to seem too far right wing. And so they always go, well, we got to police our own side. And every time we start going down this road to correct and police what's going left, they go, well, out. And I'm like, shut up. Shut up. Deal with what we're dealing with. And once we deal with it, you can say, well, what about this? After we deal with it. But stop distracting from the real issue with these stupid whatabouts. There is no political violence issue on the right. There just isn't. Tim Pool is right. It is a left-wing issue, and they not only promote it, but then they run cover for it, right? They dismiss it. They were already talking about the latest assassination attempt on Trump as being fake, right? They claim Butler, Pennsylvania was staged, right? They dismissed it or downplay it. They never take responsibility for it, and then they go back to their incendiary rhetoric all over again. So
here's a good meme that I saw kind of illustrating what you're saying there, Kevin. I have to admit, I kind of feel this way. Like, I'm still here. Like, I haven't moved. I'm the conservative there in 2008, 2012, 2021, 2025. I'm just here. But I've watched things, like I look at somebody like Jillian Michaels, she's a lesbian. She's always been a liberal, called herself a liberal, but she now looks at her fellow liberals as like, what the heck is that? Like, I am not that, to the point where Jillian Michaels is looking more and more like a centrist or to the right. She had a conversation with a very high profile Australian pastor on her podcast this week,
I
like
saw that.
evangelical pastor. And I'm like, okay, I wish you would talk to like maybe someone who has a little bit more intellectual approach, but still the fact that she's talking to an evangelical pastor on her podcast, I never thought I'd see that day in 2008. And I've listened to her podcast for a very long time.
And not only that, she's a lesbian.
Yes.
Right.
And so, like, yeah, this graphic is exactly what I was saying. The people we used to consider to being on the left, they're not on the left anymore because the window has shifted so far left. They're right wing now. They're on the right. The leftists were mad that Barry Weiss took over CBS. Remember they ran her out of the New York Times.
And Barry Weiss is just like almost now just a middle of the road to right. She's also a lesbian.
I was waiting to say that. Yes.
She's a Jewish lesbian who for most of her life has been kind of an atheist agnostic Jew. And she's kind of now just more of a classical reporter trying to be neutral and unbiased. They've hired her over to head up CBS News, but I mean, she's looking at her fellow leftists and saying, well, whatever that is, I am not that.
Bill Maher, someone of them called Bill Maher like the most racist person. It's like, this dude is a hippie, liberal Democrat, weed smoking, and you like, but they have no place for him because they didn't follow the progressive playbook. They didn't go all the way left with them. And so now all of those people, that's why MAGA is a populist movement. All the people who were disenfranchised by the woke left voted MAGA, right? And they keep trying to frame MAGA as some type of white supremacist group. And it makes no sense. You guys have gone to TPUSA events. And what do we say? It's a mixed bag. We'll say that.
It is a mixed bag.
It's a funny little coalition.
It's a hodgepodge.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah. So you got your hardcore evangelicals, and then right next to them, you got gays against groomers, right? Who have been banded together under this umbrella to oppose something, right? So that's the political right today. And there is no violence on the political right. There is no violence problem, right? The violence is coming from the left because they have lost their minds and their ideology promotes violence as an act of righteousness. That's the problem.
Ditto.
So here's another tweet from Anon to that effect on X I thought was interesting. She says, it might be helpful if Democratic leaders publicly and forcefully condemn the hatred and violence that now characterizes their political party instead of provoking and applauding it.
Yes. And an example of this is what we were just talking about. Fetterman used to be super left and progressive, we thought, and now he's the same siding with Republicans. It's crazy.
He's one of the few Democrats that's like, just stop this stuff, stop villainizing everything the president does. Like, there are a few things that I agree with the president on, and this is good, and we can call it good. And so, what a mess. But I just don't remember when Clinton was president or Obama was president. Like, I don't remember this many assassination attempts on them. Like, I didn't like them as presidents. I didn't agree with some of their policies. but I don't remember hearing about like people wanting to kill them. I mean, I do remember there was one of the presidents, and I think it was maybe during the Bush administration, where people were sending like poison envelopes to people in the administration. It was like
Oh, the
rice and poison or something.
yeah, anthrax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Anthrax.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
anthrax.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Um,
But this just seems like next level. I don't remember all of the mainstream media rhetoric and the Hollywood rhetoric and all of that to reinforce everything.
our society has devolved, right? You're talking
Yeah.
about anxiety at an all-time high. We're talking about just psychological health, all-time low. Singleness and loneliness, all-time high. Like we've got so many issues in our society to where this just adds to it. And it's like, putting Mentos in a bottle of Coke, right? It's just making it explode and people are losing their minds because we're not grounded. People are not grounded in faith anymore. They're not grounded in their community, in their families anymore. People are looking for purpose and they thinking they're finding it in these social causes, right? And that's what we're seeing. And it's just really sad to see what's happening to our nation. And people who know it's happening, people who are intentionally causing it, and people who are benefiting from it. And so, yeah,
I would
they
also,
all have a D by
sorry,
their
go
name.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would also say though that people like the presidents that you named and saying, we haven't had an assassination attempt on them, minus a little anthrax scares, they weren't a threat to the situation the way that
Mhm.
Trump shows up. Trump shows up, he isn't talking politics. He's like, they trying to queer your child. They trying to cut your kid balls off and call your little boy a girl and tell you that it's okay in school. Like he's just blunt and he's just saying what's there. He's saying what the average normal thinking American is seeing and is being like, what the heck is going on? He is saying that from the world's largest stage. None of the other presidents had the gumption, the wherewithal, the courage to be able to just stand there and do that. And he is in real time just standing against or in front of the path that leads us right on through to the rest of the destruction. And I think that is just such a threat that it has to be annihilated. Yeah, annihilated, I think is the right word. But also the same thing with Charlie. Like there's just something to narratives that are being pushed that if it's seen as a big enough threat, it has to be taken out. And that's why I don't think you see the assassination attempts on former presidents. Matt Pruitt said the testicular fortitude. Yeah, ain't nobody had the testicular fortitude the way that Trump is showing up.
Yeah, and I know we've got to move, but I would just say that Trump is the first president to truly have an America First agenda, and that's a threat because every other president was willing to go along with the global agenda. Right?
Yep.
Trump is a threat to the global agenda.
Yes.
And he's
the
pushing
global
America.
Socialist agenda.
Yes. I tell people, you know what the difference between communism and fascism? One is a globalist and one is nationalist. That's why they call Trump a fascist, not because he's authoritarian. They call him fascist because he's a nationalist. He's putting America first.
Yes.
Right? They don't. The left doesn't mind authoritarianism. They just want you to spread it across the globe. Don't limit it to here. Right? That's what communism is, a global movement. Globalize the intifada. Right? And so they don't like the fact that Trump is a nationalist. They view national movements as fascism. That's why they call him a fascist, because he's truly putting America's interests above the world's interests. And then when we say the world, we're talking about the powers that be, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the UN, and all of these organizations that are bought and paid for by progressive leftists. and he's a threat to that. And you see all what was going on with USAID and like this whole scam that people have been running. He's messing with people's pockets. Like he's just messing things up, and people want him gone.
Yeah.
So
all right, last tweet to have you guys react to. This is from Joel Berry, formerly from the Babylon Bee. I thought Monique in particular, I just wonder what your thoughts are about this tweet. He says, you must understand leftists don't believe political violence is evil. They don't even believe evil exists. They only believe in power, oppression, and liberation. They see violence as a valid tool to achieve their goals. This is mainstream leftist thought. I know you've read a lot of the literature of communism, socialism, leftist thought. What are your thoughts about this tweet?
I say read Marx, read Engels.
Do you think Joel is
I think he's
here?
right on. I do. It is because it's the redefinition of terms. And so when we redefine righteousness, I can put in evil. I can put in a true definition of evil and call it righteous. It's a redefining of terms and of words. And this is where I believe Christians really have an opportunity to shine, to be like, nope, that's my word. Ding, ding. Like I call ownership on that, and you don't get to redefine it. When he says they believe in power, oppression, and liberation, that is the foundation. That's their entire worldview come from. They look through a lens that is identifying power, oppression, and liberation, and they're defining it based on their own terms. And so, yeah, like this is it. They see violence as a valid tool to achieve their goals. Yes.
Because they believe that they are morally correct.
They believe that they're morally correct and that it is righteous to do the things that they're doing for the liberation of the oppressed. And I mean, even to the degree that for Marx, it was having to help the oppressed realize their oppression and go into fight on their behalf because they didn't realize they had been oppressed or they were being oppressed. So yes, he's not wrong. And we're going to continue to see this until there is a true shift in our culture.
Yeah. And I will say this too, is exactly the same thing in jihad, right? Basically, you have to dehumanize the opposition. They're not even people. Like an oppressor is an oppressor. They're not a person. An infidel is an infidel. They're not a person, right? There's no respect or value of human life. And therefore, they justify the violence against you by dehumanizing you as simply being some type of social position.
Well, with that, we will let Kevin have the last word. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this little adventure today. Please like and share, subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed. We hope you found this conversation helpful. Please share it with 3 friends, including your pastor, and also share with your pastor about Kevin's upcoming webinar. That would be awesome and fantastic. All right, friends, make sure you've downloaded the CFBU mobile app. And that is the best way to keep in touch with everything that we are up to at the ministry. And we will see you, God willing, here once again next week.